For the past few months, I noticed small changes in Marge's behavior. At first, I dismissed them as work stress or quirks that happen in long relationships. Things like her wearing new perfumes or coming home later without much explanation seemed minor. I trusted her. After all, we've been married for 23 years, and trust is key in any marriage, right? But those small changes became harder to ignore. Late-night texts she quickly hid, suddenly needing passwords on her devices. Things we'd never done before. I felt a pit in my stomach, knowing something was off, but trying to convince myself it was nothing. Everything shifted one Wednesday evening. I came home early, hoping to spend time with Marge, and overheard her on the phone in our bedroom. She was saying, "Yes, sweetie, today was great. I really enjoyed it." That wasn't something she'd usually say about work. Curious, I peeked in and saw her undressing, wearing black lace underwear I had never seen before. Then she said, "I gotta go. He could be home soon. Talk to you tomorrow, stud." My heart sank. I noticed a hickey on her bosom, one I hadn't given her. She seemed frustrated as she realized it too, muttering about having to hide it. I stood outside our bedroom, crying and shaking. We've been married for 23 years, with 2 kids, Julia, 19, and Tom, 18. Until that moment, I thought we had a strong marriage. Now, it seemed like Marge needed someone else to make her happy. After calming down a bit, I picked up her phone to check the last call, but it was locked, a password we'd never used before. Her blouse smelled faintly of aftershave I didn't recognize, and I found her underwear in the hamper. I stored it in a Ziploc bag, planning to order a seed detection kit. I set up a hidden camera in the bedroom and tried to check her laptop, but it was also password protected. More evidence. I wanted to confront her, but I had no proof and was too emotional. Instead, I called her, pretending to be stuck at work, and headed to a nearby bar to think things through. I needed to find out who she was seeing and make sure he paid for it. Entering the bar, I noticed a new barmaid named Mary. I hoped she could make a good gin and tonic, and she could. We chatted, and I learned she was a divorced mom trying to make ends meet. I got home around 11 p.m., with the house quiet and everyone asleep. As I undressed, Marge said, "You're late tonight, hun." I replied, "Sorry to wake you. It was a long day. I'll make it up to you if you feel neglected." She sighed. "I'm just too tired right now. Maybe in the next day or two." "Okay, I'll relax for a bit and then join you." "Good night," I said, grabbing the recorder before heading downstairs to my computer. As I reviewed the footage, I realized our closeness had dwindled, from 2 or 3 times a week to once a week, and lately just on Saturday nights. On the video, I saw Marge check her bosom in the mirror, clearly examining the hickey. She then put on flannel pajamas, even though she usually sleeps unclothed. I saved the video, cleared the camera, and increased the thermostat by 4 degrees to see how she liked those flannels. Marge seemed to be asleep when I finally got into bed. Thursday morning, I left early to avoid her. I was too angry to hide my emotions and needed time to plan. I called the office saying I'd be in later, then reached out to my friend George, who had gone through a rough divorce after catching his wife cheating. George now works as a major in the Air National Guard, in charge of base security. On the second ring, George answered, "Hey buddy, how's it going?" "Not great," I said. "I think Marge is cheating on me and I need your help." "Ah, David, I'm so sorry," he replied. "Come over now and we'll figure this out." At George's place, we went over what I knew. When I left an hour later, I had a plan and borrowed 5 digital audio recorders from him, the same ones he used during his divorce. Back home, I noticed Marge's car was gone. I placed 4 recorders around the house, saving the last one for her car. The house felt cooler than usual, and I saw she had turned the thermostat back down, likely after a hot night. Searching her closet, I found some outfits and lingerie I'd never seen before. Some were even torn, which hurt to discover. Around 3 p.m., I left Marge a voicemail saying I'd be home late. That evening, I planted the final recorder in her car and went to bed after her. I checked the recorders but found nothing suspicious yet. On Friday night, I made sure to go to bed late again, and on Saturday morning, I quietly prepared breakfast for the kids while Marge slept in, as is our weekend custom. Afterward, I cleaned up, left her breakfast in the microwave, and disabled the wireless access on our router before heading outside to do yard work. About 2 hours later, Marge came outside, frustrated that her laptop couldn't connect to the internet. We went inside and I checked my laptop, saying, "Mine's connected. Let's look at yours." She seemed nervous and hovered around while I pretended to troubleshoot. When she wandered off, I quickly installed a keylogger to track her activity. After ensuring the laptop was connected, I found Marge and told her the hard drive needed cleanup. I suggested she run a program overnight, giving the keylogger time to transfer data to me. She flirted, asking how she could repay me. I jokingly suggested she wash my car, which clearly wasn't the response she expected. I kissed her cheek, said I had more work to do, and left. While mowing the lawn, I realized I needed to act normal until I had solid evidence. That evening, we watched movies with the kids, and Marge felt frisky at times. During a break, I took one of her pills to ensure I'd be too sleepy for closeness. Later, I went to bed early, leaving her disappointed. Sunday morning, I woke up at 5 a.m., wanting to avoid any morning closeness and eager to check her data. I started reading the keylogger files and found 500 emails, including some from a guy named Will Perez. One email, titled, "Hey, hot stuff," hinted at him trying to seduce her. More recent emails revealed their affair. Marge was upset with him for leaving a mark on her, making it hard to hide from me. He dismissed her concerns and insulted me in his reply. In her response, Marge admitted she loved me and didn't want to hurt our marriage, saying she couldn't let me see her undressed because of the marks. She canceled their next meeting. His follow-up emails were apologetic, offering a trip and professing his love. She replied, stating she'd only travel with me and wouldn't meet him. Other emails revealed they had been meeting at a local motel for about 2 months, the same motel near the bar I visited recently. A new email from him arrived, responding to one she sent last night, and it hit me hard. She told him she couldn't go without seeing him this week and agreed to meet him on Wednesday at 1 p.m., asking him to be gentle. His reply was full of praise and promises. At that moment, I decided they both needed to pay for their actions, and I needed George's help. I forwarded the emails to George and started making breakfast. Marge came down around 9:30 and thanked me for letting her sleep in. She hugged me and whispered, "Don't work too hard today, sweetie. I need you tonight." I ignored that and said I had a few hours of work left. When I glanced back, I saw a worried look on her face, but she quickly masked it. I said, "Yell if you need anything, babe," and she weakly replied, "Okay." Later, George called asking if I could talk. I stepped outside and said yes. He told me he read the emails and was sorry. He reminded me that while I had evidence, I didn't have solid proof for court. George suggested we do better than just photos, install hidden cameras in the motel room. He knew the motel owner from previous investigations and could get a key under the guise of an ongoing case. George explained the plan: install cameras in the room, and the footage would be transmitted to a receiver within 100 feet. I could retrieve the data by driving by and activating the receiver. We agreed to set everything up by Monday or Tuesday. Sunday passed uneventfully. That night, I pretended to be asleep when Marge came to bed. Early Monday, I left the house before anyone woke up and headed to George's place. He had called the motel manager, who provided some useful information. Apparently, Perez was using the room with multiple women and was a creep to the staff. He was rarely there before 11 a.m., which worked in our favor. We gathered the equipment and headed to the motel. George introduced me to the manager, Kevin, who didn't want any illegal activity at his motel and gave us the room key. Kevin also gave us access to a nearby utility room, perfect for the receiver. After confirming Perez wasn't in the room, we went in and installed the cameras in under 2 hours. As we left, I noticed a laptop docking station on the table, a reminder of the betrayal that had occurred in that room. "Look, George, he must be using his laptop here," I nearly shouted. "If I can get in when he's not around, I could install a keylogger," I added. "Maybe he leaves it here when he goes to lunch. I'll wait outside every day if needed," George replied. "First, let's put a GPS on his car so we aren't surprised," I suggested. "Don't rush things," George cautioned. "We can't mess up the plan. Let's grab lunch across the parking lot. They have good food and a new barmaid." "She's nice and easy to talk to," I noted. "Sounds good, I'm hungry," George agreed. When we entered the bar, it was empty. Mary saw me, smiled, and waved. But when she saw George, her expression changed. She dropped the towel she was using and rushed over, hugging him tightly. "George, it's so good to see you again," she said. He hugged her back warmly, saying, "Mary, I've wondered about you. I'm glad to see you're doing better." She held him and replied, "Not there yet, but getting closer, thanks to you." I introduced them, and they both laughed. Mary said, "I've liked you since we met, and knowing you're George's friend means a lot." I joked, "He's a a-hole, but he's okay." She grinned and said, "George and I go way back, but I've never thought of him that way. Must be a guy thing." Mary kept serving other customers, but returned to chat with us often. I learned she was working hard to save for nursing school. By 2 p.m., George and I were the only ones left. Mary mentioned it was usually quiet in the afternoons, which sucked for tips but gave her time to study. She added, But it's nicer talking with you guys. After about 30 minutes, Mary turned serious and said to George, "I'm going to tell him." George nodded, and she looked at me, saying, "If we're going to be friends, I don't want any secrets. You might not like me after this, but I'd rather you hear it from me." She took George's hand and said, "I met George when he arrested me. He put me in a cold, filthy cell. I broke down, and he started yelling, not calling me useless, but telling me I was hurting myself. No one had ever said that to me. I lost it and told him everything while crying. After hours, he squeezed my shoulder and left me in that cell for 14 hours. When he returned, it was time to see the judge." She continued, "Normally you clean up before court, but George made me go as I was. The judge was ready to sentence me when George asked to speak. In full uniform, he told the judge that jail wasn't right for me. I needed rehab. Despite my past, George stood up for me. The judge gave me a chance at 90 days in rehab with a threat of 4 years if I messed up. I haven't touched crack since George busted me." Stepping back and looking at us, Mary softly said, "George, David, I'm not on the streets anymore, but I'm still a hooker. It's the only way I can save for school and support my daughter. If you don't want to talk to me anymore, I understand. I'm sorry, George." We both hugged her. George said, "As long as you keep fighting, I'm here for you. I know you'll make it." I added, "Mary, I'm glad we met, and I'm happy to call you a friend." It was a good thing the bar was empty and we were in a dark corner as Mary held us and cried. Monday evening, Marge came home with Chinese food. She tried to kiss me, but I just took the bags and said, "Great, we're all starved." When I suggested she change in the bathroom while I set up, her face paled, and she fell silent. Dinner was quiet, and the kids noticed. Marge barely ate, and I mostly ignored her attempts at conversation until I realized I was being obvious. I apologized, saying I was distracted by work, and we resumed a semblance of normal conversation. I made an effort to smile at Marge a few times and be attentive. Later, I checked the voice recorders but found nothing. When I entered the bedroom, it was warm, and Marge was wearing flannel. I asked, "Why the flannel top? It's not cold." She replied, "I'm just cold lately." I embraced her, noticing she was sweaty, and asked if she felt sick. She said no, just cold. I suggested warming her up, but she stiffened and sighed, saying she was too tired. She promised to make it up to me on Wednesday, but I just murmured, "It's okay," and we went to sleep. Tuesday morning was tense. I left for work and later heard from George, who had installed a GPS on Perez's car. I checked the website and saw Perez was across town, so I decided to check the bedroom voice recorder. On Monday morning, Marge had a call with her friend Ashley, who knew about the affair. Marge mentioned wanting to have sex with me on Sunday, but I was too tired. When Ashley asked if I was better in bed than Will, Marge admitted I was, saying I made love to her while Will just screwed her dirty. She enjoyed both, but saw them as different experiences. Ashley then shared her own affair plans, discussing her past with Brian Sears and planning to see him again when her husband Mike was out of town. They joked about Brian's size and soreness afterward. Marge also mentioned the fading mark on her bosom and how she was hiding it from me by changing in the bathroom and wearing flannels. She joked about planning to have sex with both Will and me on Wednesday, something she hadn't done before. Ashley advised her to use a douche before being with me. Marge agreed and said goodbye to Ashley. I thought to myself, no way, Marge, you're a liar and Ashley is just as bad. Should I tell Mike and risk ruining his life? It felt wrong, but then I remembered he might be hiding it from me. He deserved to know, just like I did. I decided to give him a copy of the recording after dealing with Perez. Another call from Ashley came in this morning. This time, Marge sounded different. She told Ashley, "David noticed I've been wearing flannels and changing in the bathroom with the door closed." I told him I was cold, but the room was hot, and I was sweating all night. He wanted to have sex, but I couldn't let him see the bruise. I tried to make up for it by promising sex on Wednesday, but he didn't seem to care. We just lay there with a wall between us, and all I could think about was screwing Will, not David. I closed the file and saved it. I ordered a seed detection kit online and had it shipped to my office. Then I drove to the motel. Perez's car was parked by his room, so I went to the bar. Mary wasn't working, but I spotted Perez in a booth looking at the menu. I decided it was time. I knocked on his motel room door, and when no one answered, I used the key to enter. Ignoring the bed, I found his laptop open on a QuickBooks screen. I installed the keylogger, set up remote desktop access, and configured a remote control software that would let me monitor his laptop from anywhere. After covering my tracks, I left the room with his QuickBooks screen back up. I returned to the office, worked for a few hours, and went home in a good mood. Marge looked worried at first, but relaxed when I acted normally. Around 10 p.m., she went to bed, saying she'd see me in the morning. I thought, get your rest for your lover tomorrow. I had too much data to sift through that night, so I downloaded the recorder from her car and put it back. When I got into bed, I stayed as far from her as possible, thinking tomorrow's the day. Wednesday morning, Marge was up before me. It made me sick knowing she'd cheat on me again today, and I'd have to watch the recording. She was already dressed for work when I walked into the kitchen. "Just in time, sweetie. Good morning," she said. I grunted and reached for coffee. When I turned back, she was staring at me, confused. "Sorry, still waking up," I mumbled. She noted that I wasn't my usual morning self. The kids came in and she served breakfast while I stayed distant, noticing her glances at me. When she put my plate down, she paused, and as I was about to leave, she stepped in front of me, worried, and asked, "David, is something wrong?" I stared blankly and replied, "Not that I know of." Then I hugged her suddenly and affectionately. She relaxed and said, "I'm glad. I was worried." "I love you," I said. "There's no other woman I want to be with." I added, "I hope you feel the same." She stiffened, made a sobbing noise, and whispered, "Of course I do, and I plan on wearing you out tonight." I pulled away abruptly and left without looking back. I drove to the motel, downloaded the data while waiting for Marge to leave for work, and returned home around 9 a.m. Sitting in the parking lot, I wondered how I would get through the day. How could I act normal around her? How could I watch the video of her with another man? Downloading the data from the bugs took time, and I wandered around the house aimlessly, dreading the thought of interacting with Marge tonight or even getting into bed with her. I started with Perez's emails and learned he ran 3 companies that bought products cheaply and resold them to the military, Fortune 500 companies, and the federal government. Besides my wife, he was involved with 5 women. He also dealt with issues like product quality and specifications. I saved a few emails for follow-up, nothing major, but a start. Next, I copied his QuickBooks files and used the keylogger to find his logins and passwords. But I didn't find much useful since I'm not a CPA. However, I did notice he had 6 company credit cards, with the numbers noted in the files. Listening to his phone conversations took time, but was valuable. I connected some dots between emails and calls. One call was from someone in the base's shipping and receiving department. The guy mentioned a problem with duplicate serial numbers and warned that future shipments needed unique numbers due to new auditing software. Perez was furious. After hanging up, he went online and bought specialty printers and supplies. Another call was with a supplier who wanted to sell to Perez. After some back and forth, Perez offered to help him get approved as a vendor for $5,000 in cash, suggesting the supplier could also raise his prices by 2%. The supplier reluctantly agreed, and Perez arranged to meet him once the money was ready. Perez also received a call from someone in the base procurement section, where Marge worked, giving him competitors' contract bids. Other notable calls included 4 from his women, one of which was the same conversation I'd heard on Marge's car recorder. I took a break and organized the data into folders, video, audio, data, and miscellaneous, and made a backup. Then I called George. After we commiserated, I told him I needed his help in an official capacity. He was interested as his ongoing investigation into the base's shipping and receiving department had uncovered missing inventory and discrepancies in physical counts. He wanted to see what I had as soon as possible. We agreed to meet at his apartment at 3 p.m. to review the evidence privately. George insisted on dinner, drinks, and getting me drunk to help me cope. I agreed, thinking it would keep me away from Marge for the night and give me an excuse to avoid her in the morning. As 1 p.m. approached, I felt sick knowing she would soon be with Perez. I called Marge, but she didn't pick up, so I left a message saying I'd be late because I was meeting George. Then I got back to work, starting with the video files from Monday to this morning. To my surprise, early Monday afternoon, a woman entered Perez's room with her own keycard. They embraced and kissed passionately before heading to the bed. I saved the file. On Tuesday morning, he had a quick encounter with a housekeeper. Later that afternoon, another housekeeper knocked on his door, and after a brief exchange, they shared a private moment. I saved those scenes for future use. It was time to meet George, so I made another backup, including one for him. He picked me up, and we spent about 2 hours reviewing everything I had found before heading to the bar. We left around 1 a.m., but that's all I remember. Thursday morning, I woke up around 9 o'clock. The house was empty. Marge and the kids were gone. A note on the table read, "Since you were so drunk last night you didn't set your alarm, I am not your wake-up service." I chuckled, thinking, she's pissed. Good. I won't have to deal with her. I called the office, claiming to be sick, and then headed to the motel to retrieve the video I dreaded watching. On the way back, George called with an update. The investigation was progressing. The guy who offered the $5,000 bribe agreed to wear a wire, and they were tracking Perez and his partner's theft methods. A raid on Perez's office, motel room, and house was expected within 10 days. George also warned me that Marge was now a person of interest due to a leak from procurement. I realized that I used to believe Marge would never cheat, just like I thought she wouldn't steal. Back home, I downloaded the motel and house data. I started reviewing Wednesday's footage until 12:30, then checked Perez's emails, finding a couple more vendors likely bribing him, which I forwarded to George. I noted dates and times from emails with his mistresses when they would be at the motel so I could access his laptop without interruption. Finally, it was time to watch the video of Marge. I fast-forwarded to the moment she entered the room. Watching them kiss and embrace made me feel hollow and sick. Tears streamed down my face as I watched her respond to him the same way she did with me. I fast-forwarded and saw them getting more physical engaged, which was hard to watch. Thursday evening was quiet. The kids were out, and Marge and I barely spoke. After everyone went to bed, I swapped out the data recorder in her car and copied it. I couldn't resist checking the car data, betting she had talked to Ashley on the way to work. Sure enough, Ashley asked, "How did it go?" Marge replied, "It was fine with Will. I made him be gentler, so I'm not sore this morning, just that well-drilled feeling. He's still rough, and he makes me do things I don't want to, but I enjoyed our time." Ashley quietly asked, "But with David, either he came too quickly or couldn't get it up, right?" Marge wailed, "No, he didn't even show up. He went out and got drunk with a buddy, came home late, reeking of booze, and collapsed into bed without a word." "What did you do?" Ashley asked. "I just lay there fuming while he snored. This morning I turned off his alarm and left him a biting note," Marge replied. Ashley noted, "Sometimes we all tie one on. Bad timing, maybe?" "No," Marge insisted. "I hinted at Zex, even told him I planned to wear him out last night, but he just went to work without saying goodbye." "Do you think he's suspicious?" Ashley asked. Marge replied, "No, I only see Will when David's at work. I think David's mad we've only had Zex once a week and is getting even by ignoring me." "That's a stretch," Ashley commented. Marge added, "He knew he could have me last night, the first Wednesday in months, and he turned it down. I really wanted both of them yesterday, even if it made me sore again. Now, it's going to be cold in the bedroom for a while." Ashley laughed and said, "Marge, it's your ego wanting both men in the same day. Let it go for now. You've been holding out on David for months, and he might see it as you controlling him, so maybe he fought back by denying you." "You're right," Marge admitted. "What should I do now?" "Let it go," Ashley advised. "Assume he didn't mean to scorn you, and there's a good chance David will want you tonight." I saved the conversation thinking, I pissed her off and I don't have to deal with it. Then, a few minutes later, Ashley called again. "Hey, Marge," Ashley started. "You mentioned Will makes you do things you don't want to. Why do you let him?" "He's forceful and does what he wants. I got him to be gentler, but he's still rough," Marge replied. "Curious," Ashley asked. "What kind of things?" "Yesterday he was a bit too rough, making me feel very uncomfortable during our time together. I couldn't move because I was pinned against the bed," Marge explained. "That sucks," Ashley commented. Marge continued. "He also makes me talk dirty, which seems stupid, but he likes it. He wouldn't stop until I said, 'I love your gonads.' After that, we had good sex." "Weird," Ashley remarked. Thursday evening, Marge tried to initiate sex, but I ignored her. I went to bed around 2 a.m. and she was already asleep. "Sorry, Ashley, you were wrong." On Friday, I left for work early, taking the seed test kit with me. I stopped by the motel to get the latest videos, had a drink at the bar while waiting, and then went home. I used the kit on Marge's underwear, and the results were positive. Not that it changed anything. I had time to review the new videos and was shocked. The first file showed a young woman in a military uniform entering Perez's room. She drank some wine, and at first she went along with his advances. But when she resisted trying to leave, he grabbed her, punched her in the stomach, and forced himself on her. I couldn't watch anymore and threw up. After recovering, I made a copy for George. In the next file, Mary walked in, exchanged money with Perez, and had Zex with him, confirming what she had told us. 2 more files from the afternoon included a call to Marge, where he asked her to stop by because he was so aroused. Marge agreed, and the last file showed her giving him a BJ before leaving. I saved these files for George as well. I called George and said, I need to see you immediately. He suggested coming to my house, but I asked to meet at his office since it was close to the time Marge might come home. When I handed George the flash drive, I told him, "There are 4 files on this. The first one is important. I couldn't watch it all, and I'm sorry you have to." An hour later, George got into my car saying, "I don't know who she is, but I'll find out. And Perez will pay." He added, "Let's go to the bar, James. I don't want booze. I want answers, starting with Mary." Mary was sitting at the bar when she saw us and waved for the bartender to get us gin and tonics. After he served them, she hugged George and squeezed my hand, saying, "Hi, guys. It's always good to see you." "Hi, Mary. Great to see you, too," I replied, a bit distracted. George noticed something was wrong and asked, "Mary, what's up?" Her face fell and she confessed, "George, you were right. I caught some venereal diseases. That's why I can't work at the bar anymore. I'm done being a hooker and I've given up on school. I'll just get by as best I can." George firmly responded, "You're not giving up on school. You're going to be a nurse." Mary shook her head and said, "I can manage with this job if I don't have to save for school. That's enough for now." George grabbed her arm and insisted, "No, it's not enough. You talked about becoming a nurse in that jail cell, and you've worked hard for it. I'm glad you're done selling yourself, but I won't let you give up," I added. "We'll find another way, Mary." Tearing up, she replied, "You guys are amazing, but I can't ask you for help. That would take advantage of our friendship." I said, "Good, you're not asking. And since you can't stop us, it's settled. We'll figure it out." We all laughed, and then I asked George, "Aren't there going to be some openings on the base soon?" Before he could answer, Mary turned serious. "Guys, there are 2 things I need to tell you. First, I know you're watching Will Perez. I can see his room from the bar, and I hope you take him down soon." George nodded solemnly. Mary continued, "When I found out about the venereal diseases, I screwed him bareback." Shocked, I asked, "Why?" She replied coldly, "It was the only way I could hurt him." George asked in a stern tone, "Mary, what did he do to you?" "He didn't do anything to me, but I saw him attack a girl. She stumbled out of his room, bruised and bleeding, wearing an Air National Guard uniform. She couldn't even walk straight. I helped her to her car, but she wouldn't let me do more." George responded, "I'll find her and make sure she gets help. Perez will regret everything he's done." Turning to me, he added, "And I bet David has some nasty ideas he hasn't shared yet. We'll talk." Later that night, I got to bed around midnight. Marge was asleep, and George now knew all my plans. He was also looking into a position for Mary at the base, with several openings expected soon. Saturday was quiet. Marge and I barely spoke. During movie night, she sat between Tom and Julia on the sofa, a spot we usually shared. I noticed the kids seemed uncomfortable while Marge looked smug. She went to bed early and I checked the voice recorders, but found nothing. There was just one email from Perez, thanking her for Friday and looking forward to Wednesday. Sunday was just going through the motions. Marge continued to change into her flannels in the bathroom, aware of the growing distance between us. She got into bed roughly, waking me up, but immediately turned away. I didn't mind. She could keep her diseases. Monday afternoon, George called to update me. He found the attack sufferer, and she was now willing to testify against Perez. The raid was planned for next Monday morning. He advised me to let Marge go about her week without tipping off Perez. I agreed and told him I'd tell Marge that I'd be out of town from Wednesday to Sunday, but would actually stay at the motel to finalize my plans. Then, I called Kevin at the motel and reserved the room directly above Perez's for 5 days. At dinner on Monday, I told Marge and the kids that I'd be out of town from Wednesday until Sunday. Julia and Tom were disappointed, but Marge didn't react. On Tuesday, Marge and I barely spoke. I packed my bag and put it in the car. After everyone went to bed, I checked the voice recorders. One conversation stood out between Marge and Ashley that morning. Marge complained, "Ashley, that pig is ruining everything." "Will or David?" Ashley asked, confused. "David, we've been ignoring each other for days. He told me he's leaving Wednesday and won't be back until Sunday. Now I can't screw them both on the same day. Damn it," Ashley advised. "Marge, you need to fix things with your husband before worrying about your fantasies. This has gone on too long." "Yeah," Marge admitted, "but if David would stop being difficult, I'd rock his world. I just don't get why he's making this so hard." Great, I thought, she's cheating, but I'm the problem. I saved the file. On Wednesday, I went to work early and left around noon to check into the motel. I set up the video receiver and laptops in the room to monitor everything in real time. Around 1 p.m., I watched Marge arrive at Perez's room with her laptop. They kissed, then spent about 10 minutes on their computers before Perez picked her up, carried her to the bed, and said, "I need to drill you, baby." She replied, and I need you to drill me, as they undressed. I muted the sound and remotely accessed their laptops while they had sex. They went at it rough and hard for nearly 2 hours before falling asleep in each other's arms. When they woke around 5 p.m., I logged out, but kept watching. Marge woke up first, realizing the time. She gently woke Perez, saying, "Will, wake up, we fell asleep." Groggily, he asked, "What time is it?" "A little after 5, I need to go," Marge replied. "Me too," Perez yawned. "I promised my wife I'd take her out to dinner." Marge playfully slapped him and said, "I don't want to hear about that. I hear enough about your wife and kids." Softening her tone, she added, "Sorry, I know we have other lives, and I love mine. I just get jealous sometimes." "I know," Perez said. "This isn't easy for either of us, but I'm glad you haven't been with your husband lately. I like knowing your body is mine." Marge's expression changed. "It's not yours, Will. I choose to share it with you, but I love my husband, and I'm going to make it up to him. I enjoy our time together, but I can't risk my marriage." Perez shrugged. "I don't want my wife finding out either." He headed to the bathroom, complaining about his sore shoulders. Marge gasped. "Will, I must have scratched you. I'm sorry." Inspecting the marks in the mirror, Perez muttered, "Yeah, you scratched the hell out of me." "I'm sorry," Marge whimpered, wincing in pain and rubbing herself. "You promised to be careful, and now I'm torn up again." Perez shrugged it off. "How am I supposed to hide these scratches from my wife?" They quickly cleaned up and dressed. Perez gave her a quick kiss and said, "See you soon, lover." Marge returned home, clearly in pain from their rough encounter. Oh yes, she was going to pay. Thursday and Friday passed with me alternating between work and my plans. On Thursday afternoon, Marge called Perez and told him, "This has been great, but I can't see you anymore. I'm ending the affair." They argued, but eventually agreed to talk again soon. Late Friday evening, I completed the final data transfers, sent some emails, and then deleted the keyloggers from both Marge's and Perez's laptops, clearing their logs. I accessed Marge's computer through Perez's, ensuring the login would show it came from the motel's IP address. I forwarded all of her active quotes to Perez. I returned home Sunday afternoon to an empty house. I collected the 4 voice recorders and cleared them without listening, deciding George could have them, along with the one from her car. After unpacking, I had a drink. Julia and Marge arrived soon after from the grocery store, and Tom joined us as we put things away. It was a quiet evening before the storm hit. Monday morning, while at work, I received a call from our family doctor's office. The receptionist urgently requested I come in that day. When I asked why, she said the doctor needed to run some tests. Reluctant to leave work without a reason, I asked for more details, and Dr. Benson himself got on the phone, insisting I come in immediately. He explained that Marge had been diagnosed with 3 sexually transmitted diseases and claimed she only had sex with me, implying I had infected her. I went to the doctor's office, where a nurse took my blood sample, clearly not in a friendly mood. An hour later, Dr. Benson returned, looking puzzled. "David, you don't have any STDs," he said. I apologized for assuming Marge was telling the truth. I replied, "I'm glad I'm clean. This confirms she's been cheating on me." Just then, my phone rang. It was my daughter Julia, sobbing. She said, "Daddy, Mom told us you've been cheating on her and gave her a disease. How could you?" I reassured her, "Julia, I'm at the doctor's office now, and I don't have any diseases. Let me put Dr. Benson on to confirm." After he spoke with her, Julia apologized, saying, "I'm so sorry I doubted you, Daddy." I told her to inform her brother, but not to tell her mother that we had talked. As I prepared to leave, the receptionist handed me my test results, along with Marge's report, by mistake, making it clear Marge wouldn't receive any kindness when she returned for treatment. I thanked her and headed home for the final confrontation. When I arrived, I found Marge's parents had joined the drama. Her father, a tall and intimidating retired coal miner, glared at me with fists clenched, ready to fight. He snarled, "You cheated on my daughter and gave her a disease. I'm going to knock you." Knowing I had seconds to avoid a punching, I calmly faced him and said, "If I did, you'd be right to knock me." But I didn't. Confusion replaced some of his rage as he demanded, "Tell me quickly." I handed him both medical reports. After reading them several times, he finally looked at me and said, "You're clean. My daughter has a venereal disease, but someone else gave it to her. She lied and cheated." I explained, "We haven't had sex in a while, which saved me from getting infected. You couldn't have known that." He softened and apologized for his earlier anger. "I'm sorry for what I said and thought about you." "It's okay," I replied. "My marriage is likely over, but I'm glad you listened." As we headed toward the living room, he paused and asked, Marge told us she has one STD, chlamydia, but you said diseases. Did you mean more than one? Yes, I answered. She also has syphilis and gonorrhea. His face hardened, and he said, let's go have a talk. I grabbed him by the shirt and shoved him against the counter, hissing, she may be your daughter, but she's my wife. She shouldn't have dragged her parents and our kids into this, but she did. My daughter Julia called me in tears, and I don't even know what my son thinks. You're here because she pulled you into this, but that's it. Looking into his eyes, I added, stay out of this. This is about my family, understand? Quietly, he replied, yes, I understand, David. I let him go, and we walked into the living room. Marge and her mother immediately started yelling at me. Tom sat crying in a chair, but Julia ran to me saying, Daddy, I love you. Tom followed, and soon I was in a double hug while my mother-in-law cursed me and Marge cried. Julia noticed the papers in my hand and asked, is this the proof? I nodded, and Julia took the papers, showing them to Tom. After reading them, they both hugged me even tighter. Marge's mother shouted, how can you hug that cheating pig? He gave your mother a disease. Julia walked over to her grandmother, knelt down, and handed her the medical reports. My mother-in-law buried her face in her hands as she realized the truth. Marge, still crying, screamed, what's different? He cheated on me and gave me an STD. Julia knelt in front of her mother, showing her the reports and pointing out that I was clean while Marge wasn't. Marge's face went pale as she understood. Julia then said, Mom, you lied to us. You cheated on Dad. You're a liar. Marge gasped and tried to strike Julia, but Julia blocked it, hissing, don't ever try to strike me again. You've lost that right. You're my mother, and I love you, but you're a lying witch. You tried to turn us against Dad to cover your own actions. I'll never forgive that. She returned to hug me again, and Tom joined her. Marge looked at us and quickly tried to defend herself. Kids, your father must have given me the disease weeks ago without knowing. We haven't had sex in a while because he's been refusing me, but I've never cheated. He's setting me up to look guilty. Please believe me, I haven't been with anyone but him. Everyone looked confused, and I could see Marge's father was getting angry again. It was time to go to the last level and give Marge a final chance. I looked directly at Marge and said, Marge, this is your last chance. I have proof. Tell the truth, and maybe we can work things out. Instead of coming clean, she lashed out. You liar! You have no proof because I never cheated. Show your so-called proof, you idiot. Okay, I will, I replied calmly. Marge's confidence wavered as I set up my laptop and connected it to the TV. I thought, the revenge I planned for Perez has already started, and now it's Marge's turn. I hadn't intended for the others to be part of this, but here we were. I had used Perez's company credit card to set up a website featuring evidence of the affair. Staring at Marge, I asked, you ended things with him on Thursday, right? She sneered. There is no one but you, but after today, who knows? After today, you might need someone else, I said, pulling up an email on the TV. Do you recognize this guy? His name is Will Perez. Marge's face went pale and she whispered, no. He sent me a link to his website. You're featured prominently, I said. Turning to Julia and Tom, I added, it's time for you two to go upstairs. Julia refused, saying, she brought us into this. We're staying. Tom added, Dad, if you send us upstairs, I'll type that address into my computer in 5 seconds. No one else spoke, and Tom was probably the only one who understood why I was bringing up a website called The Witches of W. Perez. Nodding to my kids, I clicked the link. A blue screen appeared with a deep male voice saying, Welcome to the Witches of Will Perez. Pictures of fully dressed women filled the screen as the voice continued. These are the witches I've screwed. Mostly married women who were easy to get into bed. I recorded them with hidden cameras. Marge gasped loudly, realizing her world was about to collapse. The voice, altered to sound like Perez, continued. Check out the witches. I have videos and sound bites for each. For a small fee, you can have high-resolution recordings. These women have no idea they're being shown to the world. Everyone's attention focused on the fourth image, Marge in her gray work pantsuit. I hovered the mouse over her picture, and we heard, Meet Marge, a 50-something MILF, though she's actually 44, a bit overweight with a loose tunnel, but a natural witch who loves sex. She was quick to spread her legs for me. I have plenty of videos of her. Click to see and hear samples of Marge in action. All eyes turned to Marge, who was pale and shaking. She whispered, No, this can't be happening. I clicked on her picture, bringing up 8 video clips. Marge's eyes widened as she recognized the scenes. and she started sobbing. Her mother tried to comfort her, while her father looked stunned, and our kids were furious. I stepped away from the computer saying, "I think we've seen enough." "No," Julia insisted. "These could be fake. I want proof." She grabbed the mouse and clicked the first clip, while Tom stood by her side. The video showed Marge in a compromising position by the bed, engaging in a physical act and making a playful comment. Julia recoiled in disgust. "How could you do that?" Tom was silent, but clearly shocked. Marge's father hugged his wife as Marge sobbed. Julia clicked on the next video, showing another explicit act. As Marge's mother gasped, Marge's sobs grew louder. When Julia clicked on the third clip, I said, "Julia, that's enough." She reluctantly agreed, tears streaming down her face, and she and Tom came over to hug me. Marge's parents looked devastated, while Marge cried uncontrollably. After a moment, I asked Marge, "Why?" Through her sobs, she could only say, "I don't know. I'm so sorry." Handing my car keys to Tom, I said, "Kids, go out for a few hours, get dinner, and come back later." Tom replied, "We're good. We'll be back tonight." Julia added, "I'll grab my purse and be right out." Once they left, I told Marge, "I'll be back in 30 minutes. We need to talk." Turning to her parents, I said, "Please stay. She needs your support." I went for a walk to clear my head and prepare for what was coming. When I returned, Marge and her parents were sitting at the kitchen table. Marge stood up as soon as she saw me. "David, thank you for coming back," she said quietly. I nodded and sat down. "We have one more problem to discuss." Marge turned pale again. I continued, "Perez was arrested today." Her eyes widened in shock as I explained. "George has been investigating Perez for fraud and blackmail. His office, business, and love nest were raided today. Others from your office were also arrested." They stared at me, stunned. I added, "Marge, they found emails from you to Perez, leaking contract details and competitor prices." Marge's head shot up and she gasped, "No, I would never do that." Her mother, full of doubt, asked, "How can we believe that?" Marge, crying, confessed, "I know I've lied and cheated, and I tried to cover it up by setting David up. But I didn't leak any work information. If I did, jail would be the right place for me. But that, I didn't do." I took a deep breath and asked, "Marge, did you ever take your laptop to his love nest?" She nodded, whispering, "Yes, so I could work and still have afternoons off." I snapped, "Afternoons off to screw around?" She winced and nodded again, tears streaming down her face. I pressed on, "Marge, did he ever access your laptop? Did you ever leave it connected to the base's network after being with him? Maybe while you showered or slept?" She nodded again, not meeting my eyes. I quickly booted up her laptop and turned off the internet access, knowing that I had scheduled a mass email to make it look like Perez sent it. With the internet off, the emails couldn't go out. I acted surprised when it asked for a password, and she provided it. After a moment, I said, "Marge, he installed a remote control program on your laptop so he could see everything. There's a login for Perez." Her head snapped up in shock. "He set me up," she cried. "Yes," I replied. "He wanted more than just Zex from you." I continued working on the laptop and then said, "Good thing I turned off the internet. There's a task set to email that website link to all your contacts, family, friends, co-workers, everyone. This is his revenge for you breaking up with him." Marge collapsed in despair as her mother comforted her. I added, "But this might help keep you out of prison. It shows he could have accessed your computer and taken sensitive information. George thinks you sent those emails, but this might prove Perez did." Part of my revenge plan involved making it look like Perez was guilty of filming his Zex scenes. I had transferred all the video files, including the attack video, to his hard drive. This made the evidence admissible in court. I also sent audio files of his blackmail attempts to his computer. George would use them too. Finally, I had logged into Marge's computer from Perez's motel to make it look like he had stolen her data. Fast forward a few months, and Perez was convicted of attack, hidden camera recordings, and various crimes. He would serve 11 years before being eligible for parole, and once released, he would have to register as a Zex offender. The IRS and state tax authorities also went after him for unpaid taxes on bribes, and his wife served him with divorce papers on his second day in prison. A week later, George and I were at the bar where Mary used to work. She had moved on, now working in base procurement and finally pursuing her nursing school dreams. It was good to see her rebuilding her life. During our conversation, I reminded George to let me know what I owed him for the recording devices we used to take down Perez. He grinned and said, "Don't worry about it. But we did spend $1,500 each yesterday. Good investment." I chuckled and replied, "This gin and tonic isn't as good as Mary's, but it's not bad." George continued, ignoring my comment. I ran into the supervisor of the prison guards where Perez is. He's been following the trials and thinks we did a great job. I told him I wanted Perez to suffer every day in prison. George then revealed he had slipped the guard $3,000 to ensure Perez's life in prison would be miserable, with both the white and black gangs targeting him, along with the military guys who knew he attacked one of their own. The guards will keep him alive, but he'll suffer every day, George said darkly. I looked at him and quietly said, "Thanks." Just then, Mike walked into the bar looking rough. He had received the recording of our wives' conversations earlier that day, and now he wanted to rent surveillance equipment from George. Another marriage on the brink, another man seeking painful truths. 2 weeks later, Perez faced a civil hearing for tax evasion. Unbeknownst to me, Marge had been following his trials and was in the courtroom that day. In a moment of intense emotion, she confronted Perez, and the situation escalated tragically. The bailiffs responded instantly, and when the gunfire stopped, silence filled the room. Now I stood at Marge's grave, numb. She had been the love of my life, and now she was gone, a casualty of the chaos we had unleashed. I'd gotten my revenge, but at what cost? I would live with the knowledge that my pursuit of payback led to this tragic end, haunting me for the rest of my life.